Every parent wants the best for their child, for them to live a happy, healthy, and for them to grow up to prosper. In its cover story this week, Finweek looks at the top 5 ways you can set up your child to be so prosperous that they'll be able to withstand any financial bump or burden along the way. Joining us now, we have Kale, the co-founder of the Money School, and Thuthuka Raymond Gumede, Regional General Manager of Sanlam Financial Advisors. Gentlemen, thank you so much and welcome to everybody at the desk. Let's first just maybe come to you first, Thuthuka. When is the right time for one to start thinking about saving for their child? I mean, when we did the intro here, we spoke about parents, assuming that these are people who already have children. But I would suspect that you probably should be thinking about this before you actually bring the offspring into the world.
That's correct. And if you haven't done that, as soon as possible once they are born, and you start thinking about what would happen to them as they grow older through school and through university until they can stand on their own 2 feet. The rule of thumb is that if they, as young as possible, I must say so.
Let's look at perhaps still just to stay with you there, Thuthuka, some of the more attractive options that parents would generally gravitate towards when they start thinking about savings before we look at other alternative saving methods.
Many insurance companies today, they provide what you call education policies and other financial education, other financial institutions as well, to provide a variety of instruments that a parent can use to save for their children. For example, a unit trust is one of that, a fixed deposit is one of those, and an insurance policy to cover for all that.
Now, we have, the lowest levels of saving in South Africa. So how do I start saving for my child or for my kids when my state of saving is in tatters? How do I jump that queue?
In fact, it should start with you before you even start there, because if you don't have any money to save, it will be for yourself. For example, you won't be able to save for a child. So it starts with you getting proper financial advice for yourself. And there are various people or institutions you can talk to that can help you with that, so that in sorting your own financial matters, you will have some disposable income left that you can then put aside for the education of your child.
I think that the low level of financial education is where the problem starts.
Yeah.
Because people don't even know what they're supposed to be funding. So they don't even, so within the 30 days of what you were talking about in terms of their own budget, they're not even really sure how things are supposed to work. So it's to identify, not necessarily, the first step is to identify what should you save for. Financial education is just one of them. I mean, if you wanted to really just extrapolate it, that child not only needs an education, but they're going to possibly need a wedding. And you need that's also going to be a huge burden down the line. So it's about understanding, and pre-funding is a very powerful mechanism to do that, because effectively what's going to happen is that the way that your life looks today is going to represent that future obligation. So in other words, the car you drive today is slightly smaller so that you can create space to be able to fund that future obligation. Otherwise, you're going to have a financial train coming towards you later in life.
But Gary, when it comes to financial literacy and actual business, training people to save and to think about money, how early can you start with youngsters? I mean, is 10 to 12 too early to start thinking about encouraging them to save and put money away?
I've got a 4-year-old daughter that when an ad comes on TV where they're trying to push loans and things like that, I'm going to say to my daughter, babe, if you have a look over there, they're trying to get these people to borrow money. And my child's reaction is, no ways, I can't believe that.
Right.
So we're in the shops the other day. I bought my child, in fact it was yesterday, I bought her some Lego, and we walked out and she wanted a doll from some other vendor. So I said to her, you can have everything that you want, but what I'm prepared to do is I'm prepared to up your pocket money if you show me that you can handle it properly. This is my 7-year-old. So what does that mean? So I'm saying to her, and you'll see that in the article this week where Haley's been quoted, what we're suggesting is you split the pocket money. Teach the child, if wealthy people pay themselves first. So if you want to create the same value system with the child, what we're really saying what I'm saying to my daughter is put some money away for yourself. Give some money to charity and then spend. If you're prepared to do that correctly, and I see you being responsible, I'll increase the pocket money.
But this involves some thought on behalf of the parents, which I don't see really happening. I don't think it's a common thing for parents to be specifically thinking about how they educate and bring up their children with regards to finance.
The difficulty is that people think that money management's obvious. You have to teach deliberately to children what you think is obvious. So that kind of example is exactly doing that. You know, you can say, you know what, don't overspend, don't waste money. All right, fine, that's obvious. But it's how do you go about doing that, and how do you have some foresight into your planning? And that's what you were talking about in terms of the financial education and taking a policy and doing that. But
it sounds a lot as if a lot of those lessons are sort of outside of the classroom, and there's this assumption that when whether you're sending your child to grade 0 or grade 7, that there's some form of financial literacy that is happening inside the classroom. Gary, you know, whose responsibility is it to get children to be financially independent?
the parents.
As simple as that.
Well, it's whose responsibility is it to get you to retire? Your financial planner or yours?
Right.
It's yours.
But Nozi, you raise a good point, because I sort of consider that I went to a very good high school, and there was no financial education involved in Standard 8, Standard 9 matric, where it's looming large, where you need to think about your own insurance and your own education. So I think high schools should get more involved. Or what are your thoughts on that?
Thuthuka.
I think today, in today's education system, if I may say so, kids are already getting involved, but we need to go back to say money matters, our responsibility matters. As a parent, you need to teach your child or children some sense of responsibility, and financial education is part of that. And we cannot outsource that to schools. That schools must deal with that. It starts with the parents, starts at home. Before a child goes to school, it first comes from a home.
Savings culture is something that institutions in South Africa, starting from a young age, should be a part of and should be buying into in some shape or form.
They do have products, and the banks will give you a child savings mechanism, which is relatively cheap. But it's about the parent identifying this, getting the child to use it, so that when they go into the shops and want to buy something, they also got a piece of plastic. And they understand that a portion of that is going away and there's a limit. Otherwise, they just see you with a piece of plastic and they think it's an unlimited spend. And the big risk is that what's happening is that if you don't educate your children, you're putting your own financial status currently at risk and your future, because your kids are never going away.
Right. Let's look at another aspect of the education conversation, and I believe that this was tip number one, getting your children a formal education and sort of redirecting them towards the right qualifications and the right institutions. And maybe let me come to you, Thuthuka, with this. Is there a formula that works? I mean, how many times have I seen people who've been to UCT and maybe studied a really expensive qualification and still just become, you know, mommy or daddy's boys, that not necessarily leading institutions or driving organizations? I don't see the direct relationship there.
I think, as I said earlier on, what do you do? Let's start with pocket money, a simple thing as pocket money. Parents just give pocket money to children to go spend at school. Do children understand what they can do other than buying sweets and every other thing? Do they understand what that money really means and what can they do with it? So as I said, it's all about financial education. Parents and as people get responsible after university or whilst at university, I know many institutions that run financial literacy classes at universities. But does everybody flock to that class? Right. I'm not too sure.
I think maybe to bring you in, Gary, as well, my predicament is when the parent makes the decision together with the child or not with the child, whether they're going to follow a degree in humanities because that's what the child really is interested in and they want to study music or art, as against going the chartered accountancy route, because we know chartered accountants get paid more in general terms than guitar players or whatever it is that you do. Is there a relationship to say that if you go for the high earning qualifications, you're well on your way to becoming a millionaire, as against following something that doesn't rank so highly in corporate South Africa?
Okay, so a formal education is your ticket to play. In a competitive market, it's your potential. So depending on what you study will benchmark what your potential earnings is going to be. But the whole thing about wealth is it's almost irrelevant what you earn if you spend everything you earn. So the aspirationals are driving great cars, living in great houses, but they don't own any of it. So they have a high salary but very low asset value.
So just sorry to interrupt, but there are relationships, there are studies that have shown that in South Africa, leaders of organizations, the majority or almost the majority have been CAs and people who've studied in the financial.
in their lives.
Yeah, so there are definite relationships there.
I'm not sure. Clearly, I think we all studied the wrong thing. Because I'm assuming we're not at the top of that ladder. But let's move away from the formal education route, because I think it's one that we could debate all day, and perhaps move to the second tip, which is informal education. I think we've touched on this a little bit, but how can we further leverage this? And I mean, I'm looking at how children have latched onto technology. You get the 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds on the iPad already. They know what different apps do. Are parents balancing what technology can do as against the traditional understandings of, you know, what children should be doing, which is being outside in the sun and not necessarily latched onto an iPad? And let's bring that to you, Thuthuka.
It's a very good point that you're raising. And as I said, just think of a young child who comes back from school at 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. How can that child use that time other than playing games or becoming a professional hacker or something to do something productive? Let me give you one example. What if you get your child, instead of just increasing their pocket money every year and all the time as and when they demand it, why can't you say to them, you do something that I'll pay you for using money that you would have used anyway? A classical example, why can't they grow a vegetable garden where you will actually buy vegetables from them? It doesn't take a lot of their time to do other things that children do, but they'll come back from school, till that small garden, produce potatoes, which you as a parent need at the end, and then you buy those potatoes. So you're teaching them to do something to earn the money, right, because all of them think that it grows on trees.
There are also some really good games that you can play with kids. Monopoly is a great game. So when you're trying to teach your child how to become an investor, you're saying to them in terms of savings, remember when we play Monopoly, when someone lands on you, they have to pay you? You're teaching them that they should be the owner and they can get tenant type income. Robert Kiyosaki also got a very good game called Cash Flow Quadrant, and Cash Flow for Kids. If you play this game, you'll actually learn how to create assets that create cash flow, and that's how you win the game. The one who creates cash flow that covers their living expenses is the one that's financially independent.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not really sure that the issue of understanding the value of money is an easy issue. I'm an adult, I still battle. And there's a lot of people that are older than me who still battle to understand the value of money. Now, assuming that, you know, the child understands or will understand, you know, the concept and the discussions around money, at what stage or at what age do I say, right, you know what, we can now sit down and talk about understanding money and the fact that perhaps you can do more with your money as opposed to buying sweets when you go to school? You know, when could I tell that, you know, the child is ready to grasp, you know, this concept?
I think that you have to involve them in the budget discussion from a very, very early age. When you say when, I'm saying as soon as they can actually sit there and participate and listen for more than 5 minutes. So I just from my own experience, my kids from 3 years, 4 years, as soon as they can engage, we start to involve them, where we explain what goes into the money. How do you think this house gets here? How do you think the car gets here? How do you think the sprinkler system is in the garden? So we break it up and say this is how things are apportioned. And as they get older, especially when you've got teenage kids, they have to be a lot closer to you in terms of what your living expenses are, because they're about to get upward mobile in terms of being exposed to retailers, lenders, advertising, marketing through their digital platforms.
For me, one of the things that really stood out in the article was if a 15-year-old were to invest 10,000 Rand once off and leave it, and assuming now this 10,000 grows at 20% per annum, ambitious I know, but you know, it could happen. At the age of 65, they'd have 91 million rands. And for me, that stat is just absolutely shocking. I can't wait to have my first baby and do that with them. But the point I'm trying to get to is delayed gratification. Is this a concept that is easy to sell to children, that if you invest and you leave it, one day when you're really, really old, it's going to be really useful?
Well, the ongoing participation, as you explained, in terms of doing chores, or you set a goal which can take a few months to achieve, you're already starting to instill that discipline. And by the way, the 91 million sounds like a lot of money, but you must ask your financial planner to bring the 91 million back in today's terms. Because what you're not factoring is 91 million, when that child's 65, might buy you a small car. Sounds like a lot. And a lot of people...
There goes that bubble.
No, but a lot of people make that mistake. They sit with a financial planner, they see a lot of zeros, and that's it. I never have to put more than my 500 Rand away because I'm going to be a millionaire with 15 million Rand.
Right. Thuthuka, this for me was really also interesting, the idea of investing in property. And is property the best asset class to go to when you're investing for your child? I would assume that because it's something tangible, it's easier and people really want to then gravitate towards as something really intangible that you don't always see the benefit. How popular is property as an investment for your child?
It's not about which popular investment you can use. As for example, property is one of the 5 asset classes. And each person's situation differs from the rest depending on what they want to save for. And for one person, property might be an option to speculate with, that I'll buy a flat and rent it out, have inherited some money that will generate some interest and some income for me. But for somebody who does not have that kind of property, you can still buy property as a share without actually buying the physical property. So the idea here is to get somebody with an understanding of these asset classes, how they work, how can you participate in them. Property, as in a physical house, might be an option if you've got other funds, but other asset classes as well, you can buy a share in any property syndication, for example.
Right, we've got about 2 minutes, so let me come to you, Gary. Let me get your biggest insight in terms of what parents should be doing to make sure that their child is on track to becoming a millionaire, and then I'll come back to you, Thuthuka.
I think they themselves, the point that you made earlier, need to get themselves up to speed on what good money management actually is. They need to work as a team, and they need to see their children as part of that team, so that they can actually assist those children just like themselves. They're trying to achieve the same thing, by the way. They want the kids to be financially independent. They themselves, if they're pushing for that, are going to create the example with the children, and through 15 years or 20 years of conversation, should be teaching those kids.
Thuthuka, so what's the